I believe we are now officially live on Facebook. How are you, Your Graces?
Excellent.
I guess would it be Graces or Grace Eye? Graces?
Great, great guy.
Grace
This is
Eye.
because the Latin word that ends in US or UM goes to I as a plural, and graces is not.
Graces is not. No,
Okay.
hold on one second.
So
Sorry, I'm muting that. Yep, sorry. I had to mute the video.
the plural of stadium is stadii, but stadiums is widely accepted. So just like the plural of medium is media, not mediums. So
So we're stuck with Graces then.
graces
Yep.
is a brace of graces.
Yes.
Well,
Remember,
yeah.
remember, it leaves the three, leave them be.
What is that?
Leaves of three. That's good.
Oh, what is Leaves of Three? Is that Poison Ivy?
It's
Yep.
poison ivy, yeah.
Oh. I don't know what any of that looks like. I've actually
And-
never had poison ivy in my life.
And strawberry leaves come in leaves of three as well.
Oh, see, that's misleading. That's not cool.
Leaves of three, leave them be.
All right. Well, we are officially live. And how is everybody? I know we started to get into our introductions. We have Duke Sean here with us talking about our training methodology that he uses, as well as Duke Eliahu. That is tricky to say, isn't it? Yes.
Eli is good.
All right. But you know, it's so much fun when you actually say the whole name. Eliahu is actually really fun.
I like it. I like
It's
it.
a fun name to say.
It is a fun name to say. So we're going to get started in our traditional way of just a silly question, just to kind of pick your brains, see how you think, and then we'll dive into the good stuff. So I have drawn from my trusty bag. I have no idea what I drew, but this is what it says. Would you rather have skin that changes color based on your emotions, or tattoos appear all over your body depicting what you did yesterday?
Skin that changes with your emotion. I'm a big fan of the octopus or octopi. If there's more than of them. The octopus is an amazing creature that is able to change its skin tone, texture, color, everything to perfectly blend in with whatever it is that it's next to. So I guess I would definitely go with skin that changes. I don't know if I would want that my texture to change with my emotion, because I think I probably wear my emotion enough on my sleeve as it is. But I would definitely like octopus skin.
Yeah, but aren't octopi? Aren't they
Yes,
like
that's octopi.
octopi? Aren't they technically like aliens? Like their DNA is like
Yes.
not even of this
They
world.
should be alien. Yes, they are aliens.
Yeah.
They are. I mean, I don't know the scientific fact behind that, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that they are aliens.
They're aliens. Oh my goodness. We have aliens among us. All right, Duke Eliahu, what is your answer?
Well, since my emotions are generally pretty obvious to people anyway, that would not be a difference. My emotions are obvious to people, I think, particularly when I'm not showing my emotions. That it's pretty obvious that I'm not showing emotion, therefore
There's a reason.
there's a
Emoting.
reason for it. Yeah,
There's a motive
Yeah.
for it.
yeah. Yes.
All right. So you're both on the same page with that one. All right. So for everybody watching out here, again, we're going to recap. Duke Sean is bringing us his training methodology this evening. A few weeks ago, the Coaches Corner did touch on each individual style. So tonight, Duke Sean will be breaking out his personal session. So feel free to ask questions as we go through. We may or may not be able to answer all of the questions. Do not take it personally. If you have questions that are pending, head over to the Coaches Corner. We will put the link up for you if you need to reach out to them and get those questions answered. So without any further ado, shall we begin?
Well, yes.
All right, I'm going to spotlight you, Duke Sean. It is yours to take away.
Okay. So for those that have been living under a rock for the last 15 years or so, I am Duke Sean from the Kingdom of Artemisia, and I have been training at a known world level in our sport for at least 15 years. And one of the hallmarks of what I teach is training methodology for our sport. I'm a big believer that you know, you can say a lot about different fighting styles, you know, fight better, but really there's not really one real master style. There are only master practitioners. And, you know, it's hard to say that any fighting style is better or worse. And so I'm not really, as I'm teaching, I'm not really teaching my fighting style necessarily. But one of the things that I am trying to do is I'm not trying to teach people how I fight, although there is a component of that to what I teach. But I'm absolutely trying to change the society in how we train, not what we train, but how we train it. For the longest time in our sport, for the first at least 40 years in our sport, our training methodology basically amounted to what I refer to as a smash and bash training methodology. It's something that is often referred to as a pain management training methodology. There's a number of different names for it, some of which tongue in cheek, some of which more to the point. And the essence of that is that you take people and you put them into armor and you send them out onto the field, and somehow they magically glean the information from the experience. And my experience has been that is just a really horribly inefficient way to actually teach somebody how to do something. And so I am unashamedly trying to change how we teach our sport in the SCA. I don't care what you're learning, but the process of learning something, if you follow a good solid process, you are going to learn whatever the content is. And so that's the gist of what I'm doing, and it is my soapbox, if you will. It's one of the things I'm most proud of. And everywhere I've been, when I teach people how to learn something and how to teach, invariably those fighters get better as following a training process rather than just go out and fight and hope it all works out. So as opposed to the training method, the smash and bash training methodology, the methodology that I use basically is what I refer to as isolating and eliminating deficiencies. We learn more from our failures than we do our successes. That is a scientific fact. And when we take that failure, and for us in failure, it generally comes down to when you lose a fight, right? And we can take that as a starting point, as a deficiency, because rather than trying to focus on trying to get better at the things you're already good at, that makes you good at one specific portion of your fight. But if we can take your deficiencies and take the things that you are bad at and turn those into strengths and make those better, then you basically just keep chipping away at the parts of your fight that are deficient. And we just get better at those things, and it becomes an incremental improvement in your entire fight. So isolating and eliminating deficiencies. So we're going to find out what is wrong with your fight, and then we're going to follow a training process to eliminate those deficiencies. And when we're talking about isolating deficiencies, you have to understand that I am coming to this from a perspective of there is always something wrong with your fight. And that doesn't mean that I'm here to tell people that they're just awful fighters and not do anything about that, right? But I'm going to focus on what is wrong with your fight. And I'm always assuming that there is something wrong with your fight. There has to be something wrong with your fight. If there's not something wrong with your fight, then you are a complete fighter in every imaginable way, and you don't need us. And to some extent, we don't need you either. So there's always something wrong with your fight, and we're going to break that down. So when you come to me and ask me for help, and you ask me to analyze your fight and to help you get better, I'm not going to tell you about all the great things that you're doing well. I may mention them in passing, but it is in passing, because I'm going to laser focus on what is wrong with the fight, and then we're going to go from there. So we're going to isolate and eliminate those deficiencies. And we're going to use those failures as a starting point for what you need to fix. So in order to have a solid understanding of what your deficiencies are, I need to ask you to be open to those possibilities and open to having those deficiencies exposed. And to do that, a core concept that I ask people to do is to redefine your victory conditions. What does it take for you to consider your fighting experience to be a success? If the only measure of success you have is to win a tournament, especially if that measure is to win a coronet list or a crown tourney, if that is the only measure of success you have, you are going to be grossly disappointed in a vast majority of your fighting experiences, because only one person can win the list. And statistically speaking, it is not going to be you every time. So we need to understand what it takes for you to consider your fighting experience to be a success. And understanding that winning is always better than losing. Make no mistake, I am not preaching a losing mentality. I am not telling you that it is okay to lose. Losing sucks. Winning is always better than losing. But losing is a fact, and it is going to happen. And when it happens, we need to recognize that as an opportunity to advance ourselves in our sport. We have to look at it as a point of deficiency, and it's not, it's not a character assault. It's not a judgment of you being a bad person because you didn't do well in a tournament. All of those failures are really just data points. Every tournament you have is an opportunity to basically do data collection, data mining, to find out what is wrong with your fight. If you have a double elimination list and you go 2 and out in that list, it is really easy. If your victory conditions are, I want to go 5 rounds in the list, and you don't go 2, and you only go 2 and out, it's really easy to just get down on yourself about, not having met your expectations. And so we need to just keep those victory conditions realistic. And if you go 2 and out, that means that there are at least 2 fighters that should be able to tell you what your deficiencies were. That is 2 opportunities you have from that one tournament to make yourself a better fighter. And if you accept those, if you just have a better understanding of your victory conditions, and understand that the true success in our sport is not winning a tournament. It is being a better fighter than you were the week before or the day before. It's making progress in our sport. And that progress cannot always be determined strictly by wins and losses. And so we need to just take a different look at that, and accept that you can have less success one tournament to the next, and still have made progress in your sport. There's a saying about the stock market where past results do not determine future returns, or are not a guarantee of future returns. Just because you do well in one tournament doesn't mean you should expect to go that far in every tournament. And so you need to be open to that possibility that failure is going to happen. And it's understanding that is a valuable tool. That failure and those deficiencies is valuable information. And that is what we use to engage the training process to eliminate those deficiencies, to make ourselves better fighters. So the training process itself, in any learning endeavor, there is basically 3 phases of learning. There's training, there's practice, and there's an evaluation. The essence of it is that the training is where you are taught how to do the thing. That is the instructional portion of it. Practice is the work that you do on your own at home to get better at the thing. And then the evaluation is where you find out how much progress you have made in learning the thing. Thus, in re-engaging the training process, beginning with this training. If you do the evaluation, you find out you still have deficiencies, you go back to the training and you're taught again how to do the parts of it that were deficient. So, and understanding too that this is a never-ending cycle of learning. It may be that as you're getting this evaluation, and you may find out that you need more work on the one thing, and so you keep going back and you work on that thing. Ideally, as you get to tournament, which is the most consistent form of evaluation that we have, it's not the best evaluation we have, but it is the most consistent evaluation we have. So if you, ideally, from one tournament to the next, even if you don't go further in the tournament, if you've made progress in one of those areas, then it may be time that exposes the next greatest deficiency in your fight. And so then you can start on that. If you still need work on the thing you've been working on, say you're working on footwork, and you go to a tournament and your footwork still needs work, we can go back to that. We can re-engage the training process. We can teach you again. We can do more drills. You can do more homework on that. But if you get progress on your footwork and now your stick mechanics need work, we can go back to the PEL and we can teach you how to do the mechanics better. We can find better mechanics for your body, and then you make progress on that. And then it's just this never-ending cycle. And sometimes it's you working on the same thing over and over again. Sometimes ideally it's you moving on to something else. It's you honestly failing in different and unique ways. But now that you are failing in different ways, that is in and of itself progress. And when we look at that from our victory conditions, progress is the real goal, because eventually body count in our sport is just kind of a convenient byproduct of making progress as a fighter. But if you focus on body count, you're never really going to be able to learn what you need. And if you just kind of ignore the body count side of it, then you can just chip away at it for the sake of being a better fighter. And then one day you just look back and there's a whole string of dead bodies behind you and you don't know how they got there. So if we think about the training process as a college math class, in a college math class, you have a professor who will get up on the board and they will demonstrate how to solve an equation. They'll write an equation up on the board. They will go through the steps to solve that equation. That is training. That is where you were taught how to do the thing. Then you do practice where you have your homework. You will have you'll have your textbook. You may or may not have access to the answers available to make sure that you came to the right conclusion. You got the right answer. But you're going to go home and you're going to do that work on your own. You're going to do a series of problems, as many as it takes, for you to get an understanding of what that concept is. And you don't have the benefit of the teacher telling you step by step how to do it. This is where you do it on your own. And then at some point, usually say a midterm. So you'll have a midterm test. That's your evaluation. So you come into this midterm test and you're tested on the information that you've studied and that you've been taught on and that you practice. You do this evaluation. And at that evaluation, this is where we find out where your deficiencies are. And if anybody who's taken any test of this nature, you know that when the test results come back, assuming that you did not get all of the answers correct, which are the questions that you are immediately going to focus on? Are you going to look at the problems that you got right and pat yourself on the back and tell you how great you were? Or are you going to go to the questions you got wrong? And invariably, we always go to the questions we got wrong, because that is a point of failure. That is where we have clearly identified a point where we did not understand the subject material well enough to get it right. Success we take as the natural order of things. We expect to get it right. We expect to get it correct. And so you look at some of the answers you got correct, and you're just going to gloss over those and pass those right by, not understanding that you didn't necessarily get that right because you understood the material thoroughly. You may have just guessed right. And that's great, and it looks good on your score, but it doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you understand the material any better. And so that's the value of that evaluation, is isolating the deficiencies, and that's where the process starts over again. So to basically summarize in about 10 words or less, my entire training methodology amounts to this: isolate and eliminate your deficiencies, redefine your victory conditions, and then fix those things through a training process, which involves training, practice, and evaluation. So that's the gist of it. And so I'm going to turn this over to my co-host, Duke Eliahu, who is a college professor who we've brought in for his expertise in curriculum development and understanding how people learn things. So Eli, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. So Duke Sean is doing a lot of things according to really sound pedagogical principles. And just by way of background, I was certified in secondary education as an undergrad, but before I got a job in teaching, I got a job in advertising and worked in that for a long time, until eventually I came back around to teaching for 11 years now at the college level, undergraduate and graduate studies. And I too, when I started fighting in the SCA, which was about 41 years ago, it was the training, the teaching part of it consisted of putting you in armor and hitting you until you figured out how not to get hit. And it's amazing that I or anybody else stuck with it. But I did along the way meet several people who had organized their content and their approach into a system. And a couple of things just to comment on what Duke Sean is talking about. The things he's done very well are, first of all, understanding the context. Who's the student? Who is, where are they? Is this a ongoing relationship between the teacher and the student? Is this a one-time thing? Hey, somebody approaches you, can you help me with something? Show me what I'm doing wrong. That's a different context. So you have to understand what the agreement is between the teacher and the student. And he's assumed that as the base level of what he's talking about. And then he's organized his content into a system. And I differentiate between, and semantics are always important, defining your terms and definitions. But he refers to a system, or I refer to a system, rather than a style, because people will emulate a style without understanding. And we've all seen a lot of that. Oh, this guy's successful using this thing, I'll pick it up. I'm trying to emulate, but it's emulation without understanding is always a problem. So a system, an organized, structured content, an approach to doing anything is a system. And there's a process. And as he mentions, focusing on teaching students to focus on the process of what they're doing, the process of improvement, not focus on the end result of victories or winning, That's always the byproduct. Focus on the process, and that result will take care of itself, the string of dead bodies, as he said. So the another part is then, once it's a system, building the presentation and the lessons of that content in a logical order, so each lesson builds upon the previous lesson. And then there are evaluation stages to determine which lessons need revisiting or reinforcement. And so it's not a, hey, I've learned this and I learned this and I learned it. And it's always revisiting, and progress is just sometimes described as a helix, where you learn something and you learn more and it comes around, and then you find you're back revisiting what you started with, but at a higher level, and you're refining that, and so on and so on. And so I remember from so I also used to do a lot of theater, and a great director I talked to about, I was an assistant director, and I was talking to this director who said, it's the temptation when directing is to focus on the parts of the performance of the actors who are doing great, and to really work with them and help them be better. But that makes it for a very uneven performance. If you focus on the parts of the performance that are weakest, the performances, the actors, the parts of the play that are weakest, and help those get better, then you have something that's overall of a higher quality. And by analogy, the same thing is true of an individual seeking excellence in, or learning in any endeavor, and fighting included. If you only focus on the things you do well and keep focusing on those, then what about the things that are you're weakest at? You need to visit those, and that's part of the assessment phase. I forgot what that
evaluation.
Thank you. That evaluation phase, where you're looking at where the deficiencies are, and that's essential to having a higher level of performance in everything. And so I think the final thing that I want to mention in terms of what you're doing right, and I'm going to do a presentation on lessons from the classroom for teaching SCA fighting. And one of the biggest problems that any teacher, professor, any instructor has is students often treat every class like a standalone experience. I just need to get through this class, the final exam, and get a passing grade, and I'll go on to the next one. And they forget what they learned in the previous class. And that's a problem. It's also a problem when you're teaching fighting, for example, where you spend time and you get somebody working on improving a certain thing, maybe the footwork or something, and then you start working on something else and the footwork goes to hell. So you have to go back to that, and you have to, I think of it as stacking the skills. You have to go back and make sure that the lower levels are still there. There used to be an old variety show or vaudeville act called a plate spinner, and the fellow had a stick and a plate, and he would put the stick in a stand and spin the plate, and then he put another stick in a stand and spin the plate, balancing. And when it's spinning, it's balanced on, and he would keep doing that. But he had a whole row of these, and he had to, as he kept adding them, he had to go back to the first one and spin it some more, because it would start to wobble, until he could finally get them all spinning all at the same time. And in a lot of ways, I think of that as a good analogy for learning, because it's too easy to focus on the plate I'm spinning now, and forget about the first one. And if you forget about the first one, it falls, then the others start to fall as well. So I think Duke Sean has organized his content in a way that's really good with what I think of as sound pedagogy from classroom instruction, which, as I mentioned, when I started, it was just put you in armor and hit you till you don't get hit. And as I have, being a teacher by training and now by profession, I have thought about how to apply sound teaching principles to fighting. And so that's really a large part of what this event, what we're doing here, this series is about, is how to help people be better teachers. And being a better teacher helps you be a better student as well. So that's my analysis of what presented.
Thank you, sir. That's I really like the analogy of the helix. I hadn't heard of it that way. I really like that, because yeah, you're right. It keeps coming back around, just at a higher level. That's a great way to put that.
You're welcome.
So Vesper, that's the gist of the content. So at this point, we can open up the field to any questions that might be out there.
All right. As of right now, let's see. It looks like a lot of support for what you're saying. They're really liking it. I don't see any specific questions at the moment. So in the meantime, I'm going to ask you guys a fun question that has nothing to do with anything. Yeah. Yay. And then please, by all means, do ask your questions. We want to hear them. The Coaches Corner is awesome, so you should utilize their resource of knowledge as much as possible. All right. What animal would be the most terrifying if it could speak?
Octopus.
Actually, you have a thing
it wouldn't. I like that. I mean, it's a great animal. If it could speak, it's not so much that it would be terrifying, but we would. I personally welcome our octopi lord and masters.
Would you ask them if they're aliens?
I would. But
they might kill you, because
they are just ridiculously smart animals. It never fails to impress me. And if they could speak, what an octopus could tell us. They probably just tell us we're doing it all wrong.
Probably. Duke Eliahu, what about you?
Well, I don't know that I would say that hearing any animal speak would be terrifying. I think it'd be fascinating. It'd be absolutely fascinating. I think I'd love to be able to talk to our cats and our dog, but not to be terrified, just to understand them, to hear in their voice, not the voices that we imagine for them. But no, I don't know that hearing any animal express their thoughts and true nature would be
too terrifying.
Terrifying, not the hearing them speak. The animal itself, in certain circumstances, could absolutely be terrifying, but not hearing them, I think I'd be fascinated.
I do not want my dogs to talk. One of them has a lot of sass. She's constantly giving me sass, so no thank you on the animals talking to me.
They communicate pretty clearly in a ways.
You know exactly what they're thinking, typically. All right, we have a question from the audience. The question is, do you pull from any agility, Scrum software development techniques for the training, practice, evaluation model? This person is a certified Scrum master, and what you describe resonates very strongly with those systems.
I'm not really sure I understand the question. Is that on Facebook?
It is on Facebook, yes.
Yeah. So I can talk a little bit.
Okay, sure.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you.
So in my experience before academia, working in advertising and marketing, and as a consultant too, I've certainly dealt with project managers who work in that agile system. and worked with a lot of good project managers. And I think in a lot of ways, my approach to managing my own work is and projects with teaching and writing projects and other things, very much in keeping with those principles. So yeah, there's rather than say, it's drawn from that or it relates to that, I would say rather that just like all the martial arts, or philosophies or teaching systems, I often look for the things that are similar in very different systems, because that's where I often find something worth exploring more deeply, a grain of truth, a grain of something that's really resonates with everybody. So I came across a little booklet, a little manual of Japanese stick fighting years ago. And except for the clothes they're wearing, the photographs look like they could be posing for Fiore, because the way they move and what they're saying, it's very similar. There are similarities, and I say there are similarities in effective teaching pedagogy and instruction and project management and agile and those sorts of things. Yeah, and I think in the same way that, say, I drew on my teaching background in the classroom, applied it to SCA fighting, I absolutely encourage you to draw on your own professional expertise in whatever area you have and apply it to teaching fighting, the SCA, your own learning process, because the teaching is not just a teacher forcing knowledge into a student. It's a cooperative, collaborative process between the teacher and the student. The student has to be actively engaged with their own learning. And so use that process to guide your own learning. Set up your own sprints for, I'm going to do this and I'm going to focus on this. And just keeping in mind that you'll revisit that again and again and again. It's not like you'll complete something and it's done and you're on to the next thing. You'll keep revisiting it.
Yeah, I think I'm not really familiar with Scrum, but from a software development perspective, I have often referred to this as I think SCA Combat should be more open source rather than proprietary. If that kind of helps address that, I think as Eli was saying, I've said a long time that the more you are exposed to the differences, the more you understand the commonalities. So getting all this information from as many different sources as you can gets you closer and closer to like what could be considered the truth of it all. So yeah, I look at it as more proprietary or more open source and less proprietary. So we're all on this together, and there's no one right way to do it. There are a lot of bad ways to do it, but you keep asking the same questions from several different instructors, and yes, you are going to get different answers, and that's kind of the whole point.
We have a question regarding focusing a student. How do you help refocus a student when they're all over the place, or is that entirely up to them?
So was that the one we had in the Zoom chat there?
That is in our Facebook chat.
Okay. So what's the question? How do we refocus somebody?
How do we refocus a student, or you, not me, trust me, not me.
Yeah. Oh, there will come a time.
I don't know about that. How do you refocus a student, or is that entirely up to them?
It's partially up to them. It comes back to victory conditions. For me, it's occasionally having to remind my students that not all victories are created equal, and your losses are not as not as bad as, they're not as devastating as you think they are in the moment, and that it's just information, and getting people to have faith in the process, because again, fighting style is very subjective and it's very personal, and everybody's got their own fighting style. Everybody out in the mid realm that fights the A-frame because Branos is fighting the A-frame, well, they're all fighting it very differently than he is. They think they're fighting that system, and they're emulating it, and they're but his style is his style, and you can emulate that, but you can if you don't have his boxing background, then you can't do that. There's certain things that you just don't have the experience to do. So for refocusing that, like I said, the style is very subjective, very personal, but the process is proven. And we've got several people here in the Zoom session that if we run out of questions, I might hit up a couple of these guys that I've worked with who found success once I taught them about the process. The process is proven. And if you have faith in the process, and you can tell your students, just keep doing the work and keep going through the process will bear fruit eventually.
Great. We have a lot of questions coming in, actually.
Yay.
Yay, wonderful. Audience participation, perfect.
Yes.
So one question is, what advice would you recommend to folks that are just starting to teach? How do they come up with their own methodology?
And that's the thing about this method, is like, it's not mine. It's just good, solid, as Eli put it, pedagogical. It's a structure. It's a system. It's not the what you're teaching, it's the how you're teaching it. So if you're teaching using this process, training, practice, and evaluation, if you start with just those three things, those are going to reveal itself, right? When you're looking at the training portion of it, I have plenty of drills that I do for different portions of the fight, and for that one person that just does not get it from the drill that I happen to be doing right there, I can make another drill. So again, that's the content of it is going to be different. You can make up your own drill for footwork. I use what I call a compass drill, which is just basically an 8-point compass on the ground. And I just recently realized that there's this hourglass footwork thing that I've never used before. It's not the what you're learning, it's how you're learning it. And the how you're learning it is universal, absolutely universal. When you apply this as a methodology, you do the training, you give somebody a drill, and then you send them home and you have them do that work on their own. And then you keep doing that and you check back on them, and then eventually you put them into a tournament and you find out how much progress they've made on that thing.
Perfect.
And if I can
Sure.
add to that, I would say in the same way that what we're talking about, somebody learning fighting, we're not saying, and I know there are some questions here about, well, what do you do if you don't have somebody to train with? But that's a separate question. If you do have somebody to train with for fighting, and they're taking you through a process of learning how to fight, and you're just starting to learn to teach, you should work with, ideally, a good teacher of fighting who can take you through the process of learning to teach. Because fighting and teaching are different skills. And somebody who can fight well would be a content expert, subject matter expert, but doesn't mean that they can convey that. It's learning how this process of teaching is in itself a set of skills. And so I would suggest learning from someone. If you're interested in teaching, find someone who can teach. The same way, if you're interested in fighting, find someone who can fight. Actually, you want to find someone who can teach fighting. You want to learn to teach fighting, find someone who can teach you how to teach. So that's what I would say.
Yep.
Thank you. We have a question regarding creative ways to complete the cycle of practicing and evaluation. Do you have any creative ways to do that, considering we're all in quarantine at the moment? How would you go about evaluating people and getting them on the right course?
I've been doing that the whole time. There's been, especially with doing Pell work, because Pell work is the one thing that that everybody can be doing at home on their own. And I've had a couple of people on the 100-day Pell challenge thing that I've been kind of keeping an eye on, and I see that they're doing some stuff, especially if they mentioned that they were doing my stick mechanics. Those are people that I want to take a look at and make sure that I mean, there's a couple of reasons, right? I want to make sure that they are doing the mechanics as I intended that to be done, but also it helps me as a trainer, because if I see the mechanics that somebody is doing, if they're saying that they're using my stick mechanics, and when I look at what they're doing, if it's not right, then that tells me that I need to go back and look at the video that I did and explain better, or I need to make some adjustments in that. So that's a way that I can reevaluate myself as well. But basically, you can send any of us at the Coaches Corner. You can send us video, or you can post it in the Coaches Corner and ask for input. The only thing that I have to say about that is you can send me video privately, and I will review it privately. If you put it out on a page and you ask for input, you need to understand that you're going to get input from just about anywhere. But if I'm doing evaluation for you, it is going to be, I am looking at your deficiencies, and that may be uncomfortable for some people, but it's going to be very pointed. It's going to be very direct. It's not meant to be cruel, but it is what we refer to as a ruthless self-assessment. It is a very honest, straight up. So if you ask for my help, just make sure that you're ready for my help.
Well, and if I can add something to that, since one of the virtues is veritas, honesty, and it's essential to be honest with yourself about yourself in order to progress in any of the other virtues, like prowess. It takes courage to be honest, but it's how the virtues apply to fighting. You have to be brave enough to be honest for this kind of assessment. And I also teach Pell work. I've developed some Pell drills that are based on improving smoothness and developing precision. So I have for example, you can tell your progress in this by how well you're able to do these drills with increasing precision and speed. For example, I get a bunch of dowel rods and tape them to a Pell in parallel with a certain distance apart, and then have a student very slowly strike between the dowels without wavering, without hitting them, and repeat that slowly, focusing on smoothness and also the reverse angle, then increasing the speed gradually, then narrowing them and doing it again, and starting slow, increasing the speed and narrowing it again, and then changing the angle and doing it again, and changing angle, doing it again, eventually to a point where the person doing the drill faces away from the Pell. A training partner will tape the dowel rods to the Pell in some random position, and at a signal, the person has to turn around and strike the Pell between the dowel rods. So it's building up to that kind of speed and precision. And you can tell if you're not breaking dowel rods, because when people start this, they break a lot of dowel rods. You're not breaking them. It's a kind of instant feedback. Are you improving or not? And by the way, if you're doing it, wear eye protection, because broken dowel rods will fly. So be careful. But that's an example, a kind of drill that gives you some feedback. And so that's one of the things that people can do when they're by themselves.
Great. So we do have a lot of questions. I just want to remind everybody we're working within a certain time frame tonight. We're trying to keep it close to an hour. If you have questions that we don't get to, by all means, head over to the Coaches Corner, ask questions there, reach out. They're wonderful. So be sure to check it out. And we do have a special guest appearing to ask his question in person. And it's going to be a surprise.
Wow.
There he is. The one, the only.
So,
all right.
It's Primus Castus, the shameless plug of the 5 Methods episodes that you guys see. I'm wearing the helmet because I'm a little bit scared of what's about to happen. So, just kidding. My question is, for people like myself that don't have a local night or have access to somebody locally that's a higher caliber fighter, what would you guys suggest we do to help or to get that input and feedback via remotely?
Yeah, and I noticed in the Zoom chat there that Antonio out in the East is usually asks that question too. Hey, Rob. So yeah, I mean, it's one of the biggest problems we have in our sport, where you don't have access to the information that you need on a weekly basis. And my advice on that is well, first off, you need to make sure that you're making the best use of time that you get with those people. And again, that goes back to victory conditions and training process, where if Atilius, you came out to a practice out in November, a household practice we had, and that's really kind of where everything changed for you. And the thing that I noticed about you being here for that was you were just fighting. You were kind of coming out of obscurity, but you weren't. I never got the impression that you were like, you're not trying to show me something, right? You're not trying to show me what a badass you are. You came out here just totally open book. You were really easy to work with, and of course, between me and Floki and Timmer and Dunker, with you having access to all of that in one day, and that kind of blew your mind. And then you went home and went to work. So make the best use of the time that you do get with those individuals. But really the best thing you can do for you and for your group is to import. And Bigger Brands already talked to me about coming out to where you're at. And I know Antonio is out on Long Island. So Antonio, you can hit up a handful of the guys there. I've got a couple of suggestions to some folks I think can do that. And when this whole thing is over, you say, hey, can I, because I know getting out to Long Island, there's like toll fees and fares and stuff. And hey man, we'll cover your tolls, and coming out for a day, coming out for a weekend. There's plenty of people in the city and in Jersey, plenty of people from the Nutley practice, because one of the things you get with that is you can have one person that goes to the mountain, as it were. You can go have one person come out to the big practice, and maybe they get what they want, maybe they don't, but whether or not they can take that information and take it home and give it to their local people kind of depends on how familiar they are with training methodology. But if you bring one of us out to you, then suddenly we get, you get all of your people get access to it, and we can give more information to more of you. And once you understand, again, the process, training process, that's one of the things that I try to do when I go teach somewhere. There's only so much I can do in a weekend to fix all of your problems. So I'm not trying to make you better fighters in a weekend. I'm trying to make you better trainers in a weekend. I am trying to give you the tools that you need to do this work for yourself at home. And then, once you understand that process, then yeah, every once in a while, import somebody out there, because all of us are going to, all of us will. We're it's our job.
If I can add to that as well, Um, so when I mentioned before that the students have to be actively engaged in their own learning, and and also mentioned context. So there are some events, for example, or a lot of events, somebody will come up to me and say, hey, can you work with me on something? Can you show me something? I may ask them what they're working on, or maybe like there's an event in the middle called the Tournament of Chivalry, which is nights all day there to teach, and people come up to them for lessons. And when I tell my squires to take a notebook, write down whatever people tell you, because you're going to get a lot of different advice, then come to me to help you interpret it and organize the content. But when I'm working with somebody and I'm doing that evaluation with them, seeing what they need to work on, I will make a adjustment or correction or show them something and then have them repeat it and then have them go back to doing it the old way so they can physically feel the difference, because this is kinesthetic learning. You have to be able, the student, to be self-correcting, which is the goal. It has to be able to feel the difference. So then I'll have them do it correctly so that they can then have the kinesthetic feedback to feel the difference, so that when they stand, they can feel their foot's in the wrong position or something. I also give them indicators. You're doing this. If you feel this happen, that means you need to go back to adjust this. I also will find out who they're training with, find somebody from their group or local to them, and I will go over this with both of them so they can then be each other's teachers and training partners and reinforce it for each other. Doing it just by yourself when you're remote is very difficult. You have to go to the teacher, you have to bring the teacher to you. But as Sean said, if you bring the teacher to you and the teacher works with several people, now you can all help each other. You're a cohort of learners who are reinforcing lessons for each other, and that's much more effective. So that's, what he said.
So Attilius, I'm going to torture you for a minute here. What do you have coming up?
5 Methods episode.
So everybody needs to check that out.
Actually, just shameless
who do you got coming up?
I'll make it quick. We've got Duke Hans from the West.
Nice.
He's coming up next Thursday, a week from yesterday, or is today Thursday? Today's Friday. Yeah. So the 21st, he'll be on at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So anyway, that's all I'm going to give you guys. I appreciate the feedback, and I hope that it helps some people out there that are experiencing similar problems that I am. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we do have another question regarding how to prioritize any deficiencies that you may be seeing in regards to, is footwork supposed to be dealt with if there's a deficiency there before stick mechanics? How would you prioritize that?
So this was mentioned in a previous episode too, that there's only so much you can work on at one time. I mean, at certain levels of your fighting, really, I mean, at all levels. What's wrong with your fight? Everything, right? And the newer you are, the worse it is. I mean, and things are, everything is wrong. So you can't fix everything all at once. So you as far as prioritizing goes, first off, you can only, I would identify no more than 3 things that you could be working on at any given time. When you go to practice, you want to be working on one of those things and just keep the other 2 in the back of your head as far as the next thing to work on. So there's a couple of options. You can either fix the thing that is the biggest problem, or you can fix a smaller problem that gives you more benefit. So there's sort of a cost benefit analysis to that, as far as, how much time and how much effort. I mean, because if you can, one of the things that one of my big soapboxes is offensive recovery. Offensive recovery in my mind, when somebody throws a shot, not getting their stick back to their shoulder or their starting position, offensive recovery is the single biggest failing in our sport. It's the one thing that people fail to do most frequently. My experience has been that if you fix recovery, that in and of itself fixes a lot of other problems. And I'm not suggesting everybody goes out and just fixes that, because your footwork may be a bigger problem than your recovery. I had one of my students years ago where some of my former squires and some of the people at our practice said, "Oh man, this guy's got a real problem with this." And I'm like, yeah, he does. And that's not even his biggest problem. So we're going to fix this other thing first, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. So you got to kind of look at, how big those problems are, and if they are a greater deficiency, then you got to fix that first. And if it's a smaller deficiency, but you can fix it faster, or it will benefit you in other ways, then you got to kind of go with that. But basically, fix one thing at a time, whatever it is.
And I'd like to add to that. I recall a situation where a fellow came up to me at an event and said, "Hey, can you work with me? Can you help me?" And I said, "Okay." Took his stance, and it was very odd. It was all compressed. It was very awkward. And so I said, "Well, before we start, let me adjust your stance here." And because he was not balanced and his feet weren't under him, and I moved. And when I finally got him adjusted, the eye slot of his helmet, the ocular arm of his helmet, was up here. He had adjusted to that by tilting his head down, which meant he had to kick his hips forward just to be balanced. And I said, "Well, the problem here, we can't do anything until you address the equipment." So I agree with Duke Sean about get to the fundamental, fix the first thing first. Fix the thing we talked about, additive, building on things and going back and building. You have to fix the foundation before you can address the other things. So I will do a head to toe equipment evaluation with somebody just to see if they can actually move, if they can stand properly, if they can, because if they can't, then trying to teach them how to do things isn't going to work. So I end up addressing those things just to be able to get to the lesson about how to stand. You can't stand correctly if the equipment won't let you do that. And I've told students at times when they have progressed to a point where they need to upgrade their armor, I said, "That's great. It's kind of a pain to have to do it, but it's great because it means you've progressed beyond the ability of beyond the limitations of your equipment." It's like a student learning to play a violin, starts with a student violin, and if they get good enough, eventually they advance to a higher level, and so on. So the equipment, I will often start with that. Then I talked about organizing content. I organize content from the feet up. Where are a person's feet? How are they standing? How are they moving? Because it builds on that. And then I'll keep bringing them up and going back to so additive in that way. So address the biggest problem first. Address the biggest problem first, you can have major benefits. I had a student asked me to work with him, and I said, well, I could just see what he was doing. I said, well, hang on a second, let me look at your shield. And I looked at his shield, and it was terribly balanced. It was incorrectly shaped. It was just too many problems. I said, we need to do this differently, because you are fighting your own equipment. And if you're fighting your own equipment, you're already behind. So start with the biggest problem first. That's how I prioritize.
Thank you. We have one of our Zoom viewers that is going to be joining us to ask their question, and I am bringing them in now. Hello.
I have a question. It's also for me too, but when you're working on your stick mechanics and your footwork, when do you go from just doing your stick mechanics to incorporating the footwork to put it all together as a package? I know some guys are just like, they're great on a pedal doing stick mechanics and they take one step with their foot and then everything gets discombobulated. And the other thing is, I know like the West has meet and beat, and I know Sean and Artemisia, you guys have spring training. How do you get an event like that going where you can get a bunch of people to come out and do those things? We don't really have a lot of that in the East, where we have melee season from like the month or two after Burka until Penzek. So like we don't do a lot of, one-on-one training, or it's mostly a lot of melee stuff. We're very melee centric here in the East. So how would that all kind of work out?
So the first part of that question, as far as your pedal work and when to incorporate it, and I'm pretty sure I've sent you I may have talked to you about this, but I sent you the compass drill along with the pedal work, and you do those two things independently, so that your feet know how to walk and your stick knows how to throw. And then eventually you start adding those two things in there. So specifically the footwork drill that I do, the compass drill, it's just a point compass on the ground. You take a step in all of those directions. And what you can do once you understand the motion and with the footwork, and you understand the stick mechanics, those two things you have to understand those independently. Then what you can do is you take one step. You follow out the compass with each of the 5 basic shots. So I'm going to take 8 steps and throw flat snap. So I'm going to go step, plant, throw. I'm going to throw the flat snap, and then I'm going to go back to starting position. So as far as when to do it, it's when you feel comfortable with each of those as independent things. One of the things about training and the practice, the stuff that you're doing at home, is all of the drills that we do, footwork drills, pedal work drills, partner drills, all of these things we do starts off really slow so that we understand what those parts are, so we can learn how to do those things. But ultimately, the goal of the drill is to become more and more and more like live combat. There is often a disconnect between pedal work and live combat. Some of that actually has to do with adrenaline and cortisol and the fact that somebody is actually trying to do bodily harm to you at the same time. And that's going to throw off a lot of stuff, which means you have to make sure that the practice you're doing is so ingrained in your body that you can't get that wrong. But there is often that disconnect. And so as far as when to do that, it's a matter of when the independent parts are solid enough that you can start incorporating them. As far as meet and beat, spring training, the spring training sort of thing is something we've been doing for at least 10 years here, where, it often starts with somebody that says, can I come to your house and do training? And, I'm always happy to have people come out whenever. And, because if you come to my house, not only do you get training with me, but as Atilius found out, you get training with Timmer and Floki and Lachlan, and I mean, we have some of the greatest trainers in the world right here. And I've personally been to a lot of different places, and people ask me to come and teach. So when I tell people that I'm going to have 50 of the best fighters in the world in my backyard, 75 people show up. So it kind of builds itself, but it's also kind of one of those things where if you build it, they will come. It was Adult Swim last year when I talked to Duke Edward, about coming out doing some training, and that's how I ended up, coming up there to Boston in November. And that's kind of how it starts. Is you have, you can invite somebody to come out, and or you can just set that up as a regional practice. But one of the things that makes those kind of things successful is that they are not events. And that comes with, some certain considerations as well, but it's the fact that it's not an event, that there's no court to go to, there's no fees to do, there's all this. We're just doing practice, and we're just getting down to the business of fighting. Adult swim is kind of built on this same model. But you can build it, and just if you kind of build it as a regional fighter practice, and then just throw it out there, because the 1 year that we had the really big one out here was after a smaller gathering that we had, and everybody said, well, how come I didn't know? How come I didn't know? I'm like, okay, fine, and I shotgunned it out to every list that I was on, and then that's when I had 100 people in my backyard, but I've got 5 acres, so I can do that. So that's kind of how it develops and builds, and just if you make it for yourself, you'd be surprised at the number of people that want to come out to that sort of thing.
Okay.
Eli?
See you soon.
Yeah, what he said. I can't really add to that. There have been, I think that's how those kind of events started. Somebody said, hey, I really would like to get people together to do it, and that's how it happened. So I think there'd be a lot of support if you wanted to do something like that. I think there'd be a lot of people once we are all traveling again to do something. I think it'd be interesting to map out where those types of events are and see, because there's the Adult Swim and there's the several others. Where are they and where aren't they? And let's find where they aren't, and maybe see if we can't start something in the places, or find some people to start something in the places where they aren't. So nobody is more than, a reasonable distance away from one of these types of events. Yep. That'd be cool to do. Do we even have a list? Sean, do you have a list of?
No, a lot of these things just kind of happen ad hoc. I know the ones that we do for spring training in the last couple of years is just kind of been on whatever fifth weekend we have in a year. We were supposed to do one up in Missoula, Montana at the end of May this year, but of course that got canceled. But yeah, we were going to have folks from Abacal and Ontier and Artemisia and some other places. And that's the thing, is you kind of build it as a regional thing, and it just kind of happens. And
I'd love to see a map and showing, identifying all these, not just a list, but a map, and then figure out where's something missing that needs something, and identify that as an opportunity.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Just as a heads up to everybody, we have time for maybe 2 questions remaining, depending on how smoothly we run through the next one. So I'm going to bring on our next question. Joining us now. Hopefully. There we go.
Hey, Matu.
What's up, Sean? Sorry, I'm a little slow.
Bro?
Not too bad. Not too bad at all. So the question, it's actually not for me. My lady was asking, how do you deal with a mental deficiency? Is not really the right word. A mental hang up versus a physical deficiency. Like, say someone executes really, really well in, during their pro work or at practice, and then they show up on tourney day and maybe have a lack of confidence, or aren't used to, aren't used to, fighting the people that they're fighting, and they just have that freeze up moment and can't revert back to training. I feel like that's the way she wanted the question asked.
Right. So as I was mentioning in Rob's question there, so there is this disconnect between work and practice and fighting, right? And it's one thing to hit a wooden post that isn't trying to strike back at you. It's something very different when you have somebody else trying to do you bodily harm, as it were. And so one of the things to understand about that is there's a saying in the sports world that the amateurs do it until they get it right, and professionals do it until they can't get it wrong. You need to have the components of your fight so solidly ingrained in your body that you can't get them wrong. One of the questions I ask about this is, do you know how to tie your shoes? Right? Do you ever not know how to tie your shoes? Right? It's something we've been doing since we were 5 years old. We know how to tie your shoes. Your body understands so well how to do that. And pel work has to be the same. Footwork has to be the same. Defense drills, that's why we do the drills really slow. That's why we go through all that work. That's why we follow this process, is to get those things so that they are so completely a part of us that when you go to tournament or you go to any kind of sparring, right? So there's the deficiency training, and then there's sparring, right? Deficiency training is where you actually get to work on the things that you're trying to improve on and isolating those deficiencies. Sparring is where you just have to let it go. And we need to have that sparring as well, because we need to have the sparring outside of a tournament environment, because there's some emotional baggage that comes with the tournament itself. That, again, if you can teach your body to simply execute your fight, then you can deal with the emotional component of it later. But you have to do the training to get those so deeply ingrained in who you are as a fighter, that it makes it easier to account for the emotional side of it. Eli, do you have anything on that?
Yeah. So years ago, I started having a little tournament at practice once a month to give people a chance to practice fighting in a tournament, because that is getting used to that in the same way that training somebody to authorize, we would train them we'd have them run through an authorization fight again and again, so they knew what to expect. So when they got there, it's like having practice questions for an exam. They knew what to expect, they knew how to do it, so it wasn't anything unexpected. But that doesn't mean that people won't still impose expectations on themselves that can be difficult to manage. And I more than one instance I recall when I was marshaling an authorization fight, and the person authorizing, I could see they were really tense, they were really nervous. I stopped things, and I just went to them, I spoke quietly to them. I said, okay, just close your eyes, take a deep breath, hold it, let it out, take a deep breath, hold it, let it out. Now, open your eyes. You know how to do this. Just relax, do what you've been training to do, fight your fight, do this, you're good, you got this. And then they would fight and they'd be no problem. And reason I did that for people is that I had to do that for myself. I would get very anxious, very I would get too excited, or not nervous, but the anxiousness was just too energetic, too excited, and I had to calm myself down, because being too energized would throw off my timing and throw off my thinking. So I had to breathe and calm myself, which I still do before a fight. And I still do. As part of other martial arts training, I learned to meditate, and because it clears the mind and it helps you focus. And so there are a lot of techniques for healing these kind of mental impediments to when that's getting in your way, rather than the physical aspect of the fight. there are lots of different techniques. People have to find the ones that work for them, whether it's meditation or breathing or practicing the tournament before the tournament, or one of the other ones, I tell students to always put their armor on in exactly the same way every time, because that becomes a ritual, a physical ritual that helps the mind get into the proper state of mind for performing the skill. And so I do that in a lot of different things. I always set the tools a certain way. I always set the paintbrushes or the what I'm working with, or if I'm writing, or if whatever I'm doing, if I'm fighting, always put the armor on, always pack it a certain way, always unpack it a certain way, always do it, because that ritual helps with the mental preparation. It helps you get into that relaxed but energized state of mind where you're only focused on what you're doing. You're not thinking about the next fight. You're not even thinking about, you're not going into a fight thinking I'm going to lose, because you will. You're not going into a fight thinking I have to win, because you'll lose. You're not going into a fight thinking about the next fight. You're not going in, you're only in the process and in the moment. And that takes, just like physical skills, which take practice, that's a psychological skill, a mental skill, and that takes practice as well. And there are a bunch of different techniques for that.
Hey, Matsu, just one other thing on that. Victory conditions, right? When you're at practice or when you're at a tournament, your victory condition is, am I making progress on this one thing? And you're going to practice with the intent of working on a particular thing and getting better at that one thing. And victory conditions means that if you go to practice and you're working on a thing, any victory that you get in practice that does not some way include improvement in the thing you're trying to make better, you need to consider that a failure, because you did not become a better fighter. You didn't fix the thing that is wrong. You didn't fix the thing that you're going to practice for. So setting those victory conditions and understanding what makes a win today. And sometimes the win is, I got better at footwork. I got better at shield discipline. I threw a better flat snap, that sort of stuff. So going to practice, having better victory conditions really sets the tone for what you consider to be a success. All right, Vesper, I think we got time for maybe one more.
Thank you, Your Grace.
Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, you explained it way better than you said the same thing I did, but better.
That's why you hired me.
If you have any more questions, or you'd like to talk about some of the different techniques for mental preparation for that, please, send me an email or chat me up on Facebook or something. Happy to share.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have time for one more quick one?
A quick one, super quick. It's actually a really good closing question. The question is regarding documentation that either of you might have in order to reflect back on what was said tonight. How would they access that?
So over at the SCA Coaches Corner, I published in the files section, I published the basically snapshot elevator pitch for my training methodology. So that's up in the file section on the SCA Coaches Corner.
Great. Duke Eliahu.
I'm still working on the outline and details of the content for lessons from the classroom for teaching, and once I have that, I'll be posting that in the files area as well, along with I've got a PDF of a system I developed for sizing, shaping, and balancing a heater shield. I'll post that as well. I've been thinking about doing a video to go along with that, which I hope to do as well. But I think we'll be feeding content in there as things go, as this progresses.
And also next Friday here on SCA Coaches Corner Presents, same bat time, same bat channel, we are going to have an episode on the need for speed This is going to be Viscount Tristan and Duke Branos are going to be hosting an episode on speed in our sport and what to do with it, how to create it, and how to handle it when you're fighting somebody that has it. So that's going to be next Friday, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern.
Fabulous. Duke Eliahu, would either of you mind posting a link, or I can do that as well, on the group page, a link for the SCA Coaches Corner in case people need easy access?
For the episode next week?
Just for your group, just to be able to access you through the group and the documentation that you mentioned.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like I said, the file that I have is on
The SCA.
that is on the SCA Coaches Corner. That's in the file section up there.
Okay, and I will take care of putting a link to that group so you all have that access. All right, so I think we have covered basically, well, there's still a lot of questions, so I'm sure you'll have a lot of people asking you questions.
Again, we tend to go through the comments on the live feed after this is over, and we'll answer questions directly there as well. So, but if anybody's missed a question and you'd like to get back to us, you can either ask it on the SCA Coaches Corner, or you can contact us directly, and we're happy to answer those questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Your Graces. I hope you have a lovely evening, and we will see the SCA Coaches Corner back next week.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.